here's a sad story sitting up here. When Lindsey said he was going to be coming out to take a video of the LT, I got pretty excited. And of course I wanted to act and look like I knew what I was doing in that truck. And we've all heard of the tales that we hear of the fire coming out the stack, particularly the 275 Cummins. The truck only has 1,300 and some odd miles on it, and I'd never driven it at night, and I'd never driven it with a load under it. So the day before your arrival, we decided, well, let's get this thing under a trailer and put some weight on it and go up the backside of one of these mountains and just see what it'll do. But we took off and got going up the hill, and by golly, we got fire out the stack. And it was quite exciting, and it looked good. We got a good about a 12-inch flame coming out of it. And we were thoroughly enjoying ourselves. But on the way back down the hill, I started hearing a little clanging noise, and it got louder. I pulled over, and that was the end of the story. The engine seized. Figured I had seized a piston, which was very common because these aren't oil-cooled pistons, and figured I just had built too big a fire too quick under it. It turned out, though, we hauled it into the dealer here in town for some help real quick. We dropped the pan, and we'd spun a rod bearing. It's hard to believe that 1,300 miles on an engine that was completely overhauled and machined would spin a rod bearing, but the thought is that crankshaft had been improperly turned on that journal. And so we've got to take the engine out and put a new crank in it. I kind of figured that, and I believe that the fire out the stack and the way we worked it had nothing to do with what happened. It just was one of those unfortunate things that happened. I kind of figured that we treaded on some awful sacred ground that night, seeing fire come out the stack, and the diesel gods looked down at me and said, "You're not quite old enough for that yet," and I got punished. This is a Mack W71 ST, 1955. One of 215 built, and one of just a handful that was built with an integral sleeper. Well, with the unfortunate results of our road test of the LTL, we have no truck to drive. So fortunately, we had the LTL's big brother, the W model, and we're going to take you out for a little spin in it. This is what I call the him and the her. Some call him Big Ugly. Some I like to think of him as Beauty and the Beast. But I know he's feeling real good today because he's going to be the star attraction now that the LTL is sitting on the trailer. The W model was, as it says, W for Western, was a fairly rare cab over Mack. Not many people have seen them even. This truck was known as the cab over companion of the LTL. It sits on the exact frame, quarter-inch frame, and all the aluminum components that the LTL had. It's, to me, a very comfortable truck to drive. Some of the more unique features of this truck, of course, by 1955, the East Coast had the H models that the cab tilted. But for some reason, Mack wasn't yet tilting the cabs of these Ws. And maybe it was because the other West Coast manufacturers weren't yet either. Some of the sales literature says that this truck was convenient for maintenance work. A few of the ways that it describes you do that is you pop the hood here and you kind of expose a few of the goodies. You've got your lube refiner, your air cleaner, and by removing that radiator, you've got the entire front of the engine exposed. Come inside, and you pop the doghouse up. You remove the seats and the floorboards come out, and you've got access to the engine. This truck's got a Cummins 275 in it. One unique thing about Mack is they had a flare in their frame from about right here on up. So the engine sat down in the frame, including the engines with the blower. And that allowed for a much lower doghouse than you see in most cab over trucks at the time because they had straight rails on them. The same feature as the LT, which gives the LT a much, much lower hood. This truck is all original. It has a 5 and a 3 behind the 275, a Mack 5-speed transmission, what I call it has a short fifth in it, 3-speed progressive Brownie. One of the dealer options was they installed these spring brakes. And if you look at how much work they went to put these inside the frame, this is your first attempt at spring brakes, which was an awful nice feature to have on a truck by then. It's got an all Mack suspension, Mack bogies, 645 ratio. Still has the aluminum trunnion stands, which are pretty rare to see because it didn't take much to break those. 5-hole buds and things are of that era as well. This truck was an absolute mess when I found it, and it took 2 trucks to make this, but the bulk of this frame and all the components are from one truck that was sold new not far from here. I found it up in Portland, Oregon. Blackberries were so thick that they were even in the cab. But when I got it back down here and got it all power washed and cleaned, I was just amazed that the truck was all there and it was all original. All the aluminum was in it. And it turned out to be a very low mileage truck. The speedometer said 400 and some thousand miles, and after we tracked down the owner who drove the truck for 20 years, he pretty much verified that was probably about the mileage. Took all the components apart and rebuilt them, and I don't say rebuilt because the rear ends and things didn't even need rebuilt. They were just like new. But still went through them and cleaned them all up. Some of the other unique things about the truck is the shifting tower. Right here is going to your Brownies. This is your main shift tower. You can see that the transmission is sitting on somewhat of an angle to allow for this shift tower to clear the frame. There's the pyrometer. That's a must for an old 275 engine. Right here is the backdrop manifold. Whenever you see one that has Cummins on it stamped like that, that's a backdrop manifold that has a fin inside it. So those back 3 cylinders are going in their own separate manifold, and any 275 man will tell you that you've got to have a backdrop fin manifold to get that bark just right. The W model, as I had stated earlier, was pretty much a day cab option from Mack. At the owner's request, they would send the truck back out and have a sleeper put on it by able body. And this one here has the sleeper option. That cab was sold new to a man up in Ontario, Oregon. The truck eventually ended up in Dr. Bill Comkwich's hands, and that's where I ended up with getting the truck from. But it was originally an Oregon truck. So both trucks it took to make this were Oregon trucks.